That footage is real. A woman in a corset stands in a painted garden. She reaches behind an oversized cabbage. She lifts out a living baby. She places it on the ground like produce. Then she turns back to the plant and does it again. The film dates to 1900. It is the oldest surviving narrative film in existence. The woman is Yvonne Meunier-Serran, the director is Alice Guy Blaché. And almost no one asks why this was the first story cinema chose to tell. Not a king, not a murder, not a war, not a saint. Babies pulled from a garden. To understand why that matters, you have to go back 4 years earlier. February 1896, Paris. Alice Guy is 22 years old. She's still a secretary. She's walking down Boulevard Poissonnière when something catches her attention in a lit storefront window. Inside are rows of glass and metal boxes. And inside those boxes are living human infants, premature babies. Some of them so small they seem unfinished. They are lying in machines based on poultry incubators, because that is exactly what the machines were. The inventor, Alexandre Lion, patented the device in 1889. He adapted technology used for hatching eggs and turned it toward newborn life. Then he financed the entire operation by charging the public to come look at the babies. 50,000 people paid admission in the first year. Alice Guy was one of them. Her granddaughter confirmed it decades later. Alice walked into that exhibition, saw premature infants displayed in glass cases for paying strangers, and within months created the first narrative film ever made. A fairy harvesting babies from a cabbage patch. Even the advertising for Lyon's exhibition was already speaking the same visual language. One Paris poster showed a nurse holding infants while vines bloomed behind her. But instead of flowers, the vines carried baby heads. Children rendered as botanical growth. Not born, not delivered through blood and pain and family history. Grown, cultivated, plucked. That image appeared on the streets of Paris before the postcards, before the dolls, before the toy franchise, before the phrase became commercial nostalgia. Babies from plants. And that is where most people begin this story, with the postcards. Between roughly 1900 and 1920, hundreds of thousands of postcards circulated across Europe and North America showing babies growing in cabbage patches, babies blooming from gardens, babies tended by fairies, or babies selected by couples the way shoppers choose fruit from a stall. The imagery appeared in France, Germany, Britain, Spain, Russia, the United States. Different languages, different printers, different styles. No single coordinating source. The standard explanation is folklore, and that explanation is not wrong. In France, children had long been told that boys came from cabbage patches and girls from rose bushes. In Scotland, cabbage leaves could be left out to ask the fairies for a sibling. In Ireland, children were told they had been found under cabbage stalks. The symbolism is old, the tenderness is real. The phrase, "my little cabbage," still survives as an endearment. If that were the whole picture, the story would end there. It would be charming, it would be harmless. It would be one more example of adults inventing soft stories to answer questions children were not ready to hear. But the timeline refuses to stay soft. Because during the same decades these images spread through the Western world, the largest mass displacement of children in American history was underway. In 1854, a train left New York carrying 46 children west. No parents travelled with them. No family history arrived before they did. When they reached their destination, they were lined up and inspected on the platform. Local families walked past, looked them over, and chose which ones to take. The program would continue until 1929. By the end of it, somewhere between 200,000 and 250,000 children had been transported across the country this way. Many were not orphans at all. They were children of poverty, children of immigrants, children whose families had failed economically, socially, or administratively. Some were placed into homes, some were used as labour, some were renamed. Some lost all traceable connection to where they had come from. Many of their descendants still cannot identify the point before the train. So, what did the culture offer as an answer when a child's origin vanished? Not literally, perhaps, but functionally, it offered the cabbage patch. A child appears, a child is found, a child is selected, a child comes from nowhere that anyone needs to explain. And that was only the American version. In Europe, the mechanism was older. The Foundling wheel appeared in Rome in 1198. a wooden cylinder installed in the wall of a church or hospital. A woman could place her infant inside, ring a bell, and walk away unseen while staff on the other side rotated the child into the institution. Anonymous, no questions, no ordinary continuity between mother and child. By the 19th century, foundling systems across Catholic Europe were receiving abandoned infants in staggering numbers. In some cities, the ratio approached 1 in 3 births. Mortality inside those institutions was catastrophic. Most children did not survive. Those who did were often renamed. Exposed, found, innocent. A ribbon might be left behind, a coin cut in half, a piece of cloth, a token meant to reclaim the child one day, but most returns never happened. The system kept the children, and often the names became the only visible trace that such a system had ever existed. Now hold that timeline still for a moment. Foundling wheels expanding across Europe. Folklore teaching children that babies come from cabbages and roses. Orphan trains moving thousands of children westward without stable identity. Premature infants displayed in glass incubators for paying crowds. The first narrative film in history choosing, out of every story available, a fairy pulling babies from a garden. Then a flood of postcards across the industrial West showing babies grown, harvested, selected, delivered. Each detail can be explained alone. Together they begin to sound like a civilization rehearsing the same sentence over and over in different forms. The children came from somewhere else. No need to ask where. I need to be careful here, because pattern recognition is dangerous. It can make unrelated things feel connected simply because they resemble one another. I sat with that problem for days. The evidence itself was not hard to find. The orphan trains are documented. The foundling wheels are documented. Alice Guy's visit to the incubator exhibition is documented. The postcards survive in huge numbers. The folklore predates them all. The hard part is not proof. The hard part is proportion. How much weight do you assign to repetition? How many times can a culture imagine babies as things that sprout, appear, get selected, and arrive without parents before the metaphor begins doing work beyond innocence? That question becomes harder to dismiss when you look at who noticed these images later. The Surrealists collected them, Salvador Dali collected them, André Breton collected them. Paul Eluard described them as something closer to hallucination than charm. They were not treated as cute curiosities. They were treated as documents from the unconscious, a record of something the culture could not say directly, but kept drawing anyway. And the imagery itself is not especially gentle once you stop calling it whimsical. Some postcards show babies being priced. Some show them arranged in rows. Some show adults browsing them. Some feel less like birth announcement and more like inventory. A nursery crossed with a market. A garden crossed with a distribution system. That is what makes the incubator exhibitions feel so important. Because they create a bridge between metaphor and institution. At the exact historical moment when mass child displacement, foundling intake, and identity severance were all part of ordinary reality, babies were also being displayed in glass boxes for public viewing. Martin County would later do the same in America for decades, keeping premature infants alive in amusement parks because respectable medicine refused to build a proper home for them. In Berlin, the exhibitions were even labelled with a phrase that translates uncomfortably close to child hatchery. The language was not subtle. Children as incubated, children as cultivated, children as received from systems rather than born into families. And then, decades later, the story returns in toy form. In the early 1980s, Cabbage Patch Kids explode into American life. Dolls born in a cabbage patch, sold through an adoption narrative, complete with certificates and paperwork, are distributed through a place called Babyland General Hospital. The commercial frame is so complete it almost becomes invisible. Children without parents. Children issued through a hospital mythology. Children adopted, not purchased. The same structure compressed into a toy line and sold by the millions. By then, the image has become fully normalized. No one sees the machinery behind it anymore. It is just a joke, just a doll, just a postcard, just a fairy tale, just an old film. And maybe that is the point. Every culture needs a story soft enough to sit where a harder truth would otherwise have to live. You do not tell children that siblings may enter a family through abandonment, poverty, anonymity, bureaucratic sorting, institutional intake, or relocation systems that erase the trail behind them. You tell them they came from a cabbage patch. You tell them a fairy brought them. You replace the wound with an image that can survive inside ordinary conversation. The fairy tale does not erase the system, it makes it bearable. Alice Guy Blaché saw babies in incubators on a Paris boulevard, then made the first narrative film in cinema history about a fairy harvesting infants from a garden. That original 1896 version is gone. Like so much early film, it was lost. Most of the visual birth of cinema was not preserved. The one moment that might have shown most clearly what the culture was processing when it chose this image is no longer available to us. But the traces remain. The Foundling wheels still exist in old walls. The Orphan train records survive in databases and broken family trees. The postcards sit in archives and private collections. The dolls remain boxed in attics with their adoption certificates still folded inside. And all of them circle the same image. Babies without visible parents. Babies emerging from systems. Babies harvested, selected, displayed, delivered. So the question is not whether cabbage folklore existed. It did. The question is why that particular folklore became so visually dominant, so commercially useful, and so emotionally persistent in the exact centuries when Western societies were repeatedly separating children from parents, converting infancy into institutional intake, and teaching entire populations to accept children whose origins had been administratively severed. What story does a civilization tell when it needs to explain where all the children came from, but cannot bear to speak plainly about the systems that moved them? What mythology does it build when the truth is too large, too old, and too woven into ordinary life to admit directly? And when that mythology appears in the first narrative film, the most persistent postcard tradition, and one of the most successful toy franchises in modern history, all using the same image of children harvested from a garden, what exactly are we looking at? A sentimental coincidence? Or a cover story so old we stopped hearing it as one?